So let's start this morning by looking at a verse in Leviticus chapter 2 and verse 13. So here it says, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings." Now, let's just compare that with two other readings, two other places where something similar is mentioned. And the first one is in Numbers 18 and verse 19. And I'll read that for us. "Whatever is set aside," this is Numbers 18, verse 19. "Whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters as your regular share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring." So that's interesting. It's actually talking about the offerings for priests and Levites. And there we have this sentence again. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring. And then the other place where we find something similar mentioned is in 2 Chronicles chapter 13 and verse 5. Here it is. "Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt." So here is an interesting phenomenon. It speaks here in Leviticus about a covenant of salt, and we've seen in both our other readings the same. Covenant of salt, everlasting covenant of salt. And perhaps it would be good for us just to look into ancient culture a bit regarding this issue of salt. For example, in Arabic, we find that the word for contract is the same word as the word for salt. We find that there are actually still, in some countries, you'll find this tradition of sharing salt at a wedding feast. So the groom would take a pinch of salt, put it on the tongue of the bride, and the bride would do the same. And that would signify a bond between them. Something else again that you find is that even if a person is your enemy, in the ancient culture, you have salt with them, you share salt with them, then you may not lay a hand on them. There is a bond between you. So this issue of sharing salt signified the highest form of bond between two people, sharing salt together. In fact, in the culture where I come from, when you are really close to a person, and the relationship is very strong, you normally say, "I have eaten salt with that person," or "I have eaten lots of salt with that person." And actually what you're saying is you are very close. Now, I want us to go to Acts chapter 1, because there is something very interesting in the original Greek. So let's turn to Acts chapter 1, and we read in verse 4, and then I'm going to explain a few things about that verse. So Acts chapter 1 and verse 4. Now, depending on the translation that you have, it will differ. I'm reading from the NIV. And this is Acts 1 and verse 4. On one occasion, while he was eating with them, he gave them this command: "Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about." And verse 5, "For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." So, a very well-known verse for us. But now there is something very interesting in the original Greek. Now let's go to where it says, "Do not leave Jerusalem." This is verse 4. Actually, it's before that. It's the beginning of the verse. It says, "On one occasion while he was eating with them." Now you'll find that in some translations it simply says while he was together with them, while they were gathered together. The NIV actually has while they were eating together, while he was eating with them. Now this word that has been translated while he was eating with them, this is now Jesus with his disciples. The Greek word there is syn, S-Y-N, halizo. Syn halizo is the original Greek word. Now if we break that word up in two parts, so the S-Y-N, it's where we get the word synthetic. Synthetic is a blend together. There are other words as well that contains that word S-Y-N to explain togetherness. And then the word halizo. Syn halizo. So what is the meaning of halizo? The meaning of halizo in the Greek is to salt. So syn halizo means to salt together. Interesting, isn't it? So basically, if we had to read it literally, we would read, "On one occasion while they were sharing salt, he gave them this command." Or, while they were salting together, he gave them this command. So, what are we seeing here in Acts chapter 1 and verse 4? Well, we are seeing that Jesus is sharing with these disciples that highest form of union, of closeness possible, sharing salt together. The highest known in that culture way of establishing a bond. There it is, he's sharing salt with them. And what this made me think of was this cliche we find in Christianity. Well, there are so many, but this particular one goes like this: Christianity is not a religion, but a relationship. Have you heard that one? Well, what I immediately thought here was that we need to have another look at that cliche. And here's the reason why. We could say that based on them sharing salt together here, there is a very close relationship between Jesus and his disciples. However, if we go to verse 5, the latter part of verse 4 and verse 5, what does Jesus say? What does he go on to say? After they've now shared salt, he goes on to say something very interesting. He says, "Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift of my Father, which you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." So let's just pause there for a moment. If Jesus wanted to establish relationship with them, then this sharing of salt, having a meal together, sharing the salt, would have been sufficient. There it is, the ultimate expression of closeness, the ultimate expression against the backdrop of that culture of oneness, sharing salt together. But strangely enough, he doesn't leave it there. He goes on to say something extraordinary. He says, now what I want you to do is to go, remain in Jerusalem, do not leave Jerusalem until you have received the Holy Spirit. Now, this is why I thought we need to revisit that cliche that says Christianity is not a religion, it is a relationship. Well, we'll have to think about that, think about changing it, and changing it to something like, no, it is not about a relationship, it is about an indwelling. So taking it even a step further. And now I'm wondering about our own lives. Are we in a place where we can say, I've shared salt with Jesus. I have a relationship with him. But are you willing to accept that he's saying, no, that's not enough? The same as he's doing with his disciples here, sharing salt with them, the ultimate expression of a bond. He's saying there's something else that has to happen. It's not about a relationship. It is about an indwelling. I pray that the Lord will speak to you about this as he has spoken to me. And perhaps that will become your new cliche. It's not about a relationship. It's about the living God indwelling us by his very Spirit. Amen.